Well, good morning, everybody. I appreciate you guys taking the time to jump on this webinar with us. My name is Fred Farris from the Aspire Institute, and today we'll be talking about projecting and budgeting for 2024. I think this is an important topic because we have a lot that's changing in the market, in the world, with the economy, and being booked out through 24. Not only having enough jobs to get you through and make sure you keep your staff busy and you're profitable, but actually knowing what are the right jobs, knowing what the margins are on those jobs, and making sure that you can actually be successful financially and keep the money that you need to make going forward. So we'll kind of jump right into this. The first thing I want to talk about is the state of the residential market. We've seen a lot change over the last few years, right? 21, 22, arguably were some of the best years we've ever seen, maybe that we will ever see. But we've found many GCs still aren't as profitable as they should be. We're not making as much money as we should for the amount of work we're putting in. And now things are changing in 23. We're seeing coolings in the market, interest rates being higher, people being more thoughtful about what they're spending their money on, possibly considering delaying projects. So it's important that we understand what's happening and we can adjust our process to be successful. Interest rates have come up quite a bit. We're at 5.5% right now. The Fed's anticipating bringing it down possibly a little bit next year to maybe 5%, but it's going to stay probably around 5 through 24. They're now talking about possibly lowering it in 25, but that's a ways down the road. So this is the new reality, and we need to make sure that we've built our business process to be able to work well and be profitable through that. So kind of what I want to really talk about is the business side of the business, understanding the numbers and margins and really looking at the business properly so that we can build out and know where we're at for cash flow, for projections, for success. So I kind of want to start by asking, why do you think most contractors work too hard for too long for too little and then get slammed in each and every recession? Because it happens almost every time, and it doesn't have to. And really what it comes down to is it's less about doing things right and more about doing the right things. And what I mean by that is, running the business, being honest, being ethical, doing good quality work for our clients. That is what I assume that you are all doing. But that's kind of the entry point. There's a lot more to the business. Focusing not just on revenue every year, but how much focus did you put on your gross margin for last year, your true operating margin in the business? Are we factoring in all of our costs for labor, including our tax and benefit load, including the owner wage functionally? Production inefficiencies and tracking our labor hours and making sure that we have the right job mix for our business. We'll talk a little bit about job mix today, but job mix really is it. There's specific jobs that you're good at. There's specific jobs that you can do, but maybe you're not as efficient and your margins aren't the same. And so we need to make sure we're building the model of our business to get the best outcome possible. So really what it comes down to is strategies and tactics. As builders, we are fantastic at coming up with tactics. Our client comes to us with a vision, remodel our home, build this addition, and it's our job to come up with the tactics to make that happen. But we struggle with the strategy part of it for our business. We don't know what our strategy is, or we don't have it clearly defined. And so we try this and try that. We try all these different tactics to see if it'll work. And it's important to know where you are, where you're going, and then how can you get there. And, knowing which tactics are right today, which tactics could be right later, which tactics will take you in the wrong direction. Really the strategy is, where do you want to go, right? If you want to go this way, and we find a really cool tactic that takes us this way, it's not going to work for us. So we need to be thoughtful about what is the right piece for our business, where we want to go. And just because it worked for somebody else doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work for us. So we need to make sure we build our process correctly. And the reason that's so important to me is the national average net profit for residential GCs last year was 2.4%. So if you put your investor hat on for a minute, you've invested into this business for the purpose of getting a return on your investment. And, investments are, risk versus return. And I think that owning a residential GC business has a fairly high risk and therefore should have a fairly high return. We're seeing best practices between 12 and 22% net profit. That is a wide range, but we have a lot of clients that do, large custom homes versus smaller kitchens or bathrooms, and the margins are different on each one of those jobs. but it's important to build the right model to have the return on your investment. And by the way, this is after you've paid all of your functional costs, which includes obviously your in-house labor, your sales estimating, design time, your wages as an owner, all your materials and subs and indirect related costs, and your overhead. If you're taking your profit out of, or your paycheck out of profit, you're not really accounting for your wage as an employee of the company, and probably not billing it to the job. So when we're talking about net profit, it's after everything is paid, this is what's left, and it needs to be 12 to 22%. So this really comes down to your business model, right? We all have a business model. It's how we run our business. It's how we get leads, what our marketing strategies look like. It's our sales process. It's our estimating. It's our production process. It's how we put our business together. And I kind of look at this business like this machine, kind of picture this machine with a big funnel on top, and all the revenue comes into the top of that funnel, and it comes down through and it pays your in-house labor and your wage as an employee and your materials and your subs and your overhead, and whatever falls to the bottom of that machine is your net profit. And the industry nationally has built a machine that generates 2.4% profit, which is not enough. And too often we try to drive revenue to fix that, right? We didn't make enough money, so we need more revenue. So we stuff more dollars in the top of this machine. But the machine's broken. The machine's designed to make, at this example, 2.4%. So the more revenue we stuff in the top, it's not going to make more profit. It's going to make more dollars, but it's not going to make more as a percentage. And too often when we drive revenue, we have inefficiencies. We drive that revenue with discounts. And so that actually compresses that margin a little bit. So that 2.4 becomes 2.2 or 2. And we actually work harder and keep less. And really the answer is to rebuild the business model, rebuild that machine so that it generates 12 to 22%. And sometimes slowing down just a little bit in revenue and jobs to be able to fix the business. And then once you get it dialed in, then grow it again is a better option. But it's important to look at our business model and make sure it's the right model. And kind of a business model has several different pieces to it. It's how business creates value. And as an industry, we do a fantastic job creating value with our clients. How we deliver that value as an industry, again, we do pretty well there. Finding and retaining customers that want that value is where we start to really slip. It's too much word of mouth or referrals, or it's not targeted leads for the types of jobs we want. And then generating profit from that process is really, at 2.4% nationally, that's way too low. So that's really where we find the biggest issue and we need to be focused on. If we can get our profit up, we can do much better. So the business model, we kind of break it down into what we call the 6 pillars. So there's 6 key areas: marketing to your ideal client, but first knowing who your ideal client is. What is your sales process to bring that client from marketing through the sales process and into a contract? What is your estimating process and your production process, then into feedback, doing feedback loops on every aspect of your business, tracking every lead that comes in, for example, in marketing to know which ones are qualified, which ones are not, what sources they came from, tracking our sales process to see what parts of the process are working, what parts need to be adjusted, tracking our estimating to make sure we're covering all of our costs, tracking production to make sure that we are estimating or producing exactly what we estimated and we're not going over on labor hours or materials or any inefficiencies, making sure that the job is being done on time and on budget. And then into business development, bigger picture stuff, hiring, staffing, training, comp planning, business forecasting, even succession and exit strategies. You need to have a plan to know where you're going to make that happen. So really looking at all 6 pillars of the business is critical to your long-term success. But it's not about fixing one at a time. You kind of got to, we call it leveling them up. You have to work on different ones at different times. You can't fix sales, for example, and have a perfect sales process and expect everything to be fixed. If you don't have good marketing and good leads and you don't have good estimating, the sales process will actually fall down. So you have to level up each one a little bit at a time and kind of go around and make that happen. But the impact of a disjointed or incorrect business model is huge. It limits your profits and margins. It creates a reality distortion field where we think everybody wants a multiple bid or everybody wants the cheapest, or there's lots of different myths out there based on this reality distortion field that happens because our business model or our machine is broken. And it creates a break-even or too close to break-even business. We end up being cash flow driven, where we're making decisions based on cash flow, right? We're taking a job because we can make payroll, not because it's the right job for our company. And ultimately, There's no satisfying exit strategy because we basically have, at 2% or in that range, we basically have a stressful job that doesn't have any market value. So it's difficult to sell because it's not bankable. So ultimately, it's business failure. Whether it's you shut it down because you got tired or you sell it for the cost of a good used car, that's not what your life work should be about. And there's a better way. You can build this business to be able to do well, to take care of your clients, to take care of your employees, and to be able to do a succession or plan and train the next generation to take it over and continue running it and have a good exit strategy. But our experience at Aspire is that at least 90% of contractors have a significantly handicapped business model. And without a substantial change to that model, you probably won't get to your goals. So it's important to look at the business machine, if you will, your business model, and know, is this working? Do we have what we want? Are we getting to our goal? Is this going to get us there? But the bottom line is you have to optimize your business model. This is a critical part of the business. And so your business model really starts with your vision or where you want to go with the business. And then you need to build out a strategy. And the strategy has 3 steps. It's actually not as complicated as it sounds sometimes, but your strategy is 3 things. It's where are you now? Where do you want to go? And how are you going to get there? That's it. So, the first part of that is knowing where are we now? Good, bad, or ugly. What does it look like today? So starting with where are you now? It's taking your profit and loss and converting it to a management report. Your P&L is set up for FASB, and it's, in most cases, we find that they're accurate and proper, but that's an accounting tool and a tax tool. That's not a business management report. And there's a lot of costs in the expenses, for example, that should be cost of production or really are cost of production, like sometimes our sales cost or our tax and benefit load, workman's comp, payroll taxes on our employees, some of our indirect or related costs we find in the expenses, which it's not that you need to necessarily move those because, again, for a tax tool, it may very well be set up properly, but it doesn't give you the right information to manage the business. And so you need to look at it in a little bit different way. So I want to run through the numbers just so that we're all on the same page. When we talk about total revenue, it's all of the money that you took in for the year. It's all the work that you did. In most cases, that's the number on the top of your P&L. If you're doing jobs through escrow accounts or through banks, bigger projects, and they're paying your subs or they're paying your materials directly, then the number on your P&L may not be your total revenue. Your total revenue would be the total of the jobs that you produced. But in most cases, the total revenue is what's on the top of your P&L. But you don't get to keep all that, right? We have to pay costs out of that. So we take that revenue and we pay our total production costs. And production costs are anything that's associated with producing the job. So obviously materials and subs, in-house labor, sales and estimating costs, tax and benefit load. There's other costs like vehicle costs and fuel allowances and uniform costs. And even things like, we're coming up on Christmas. We maybe want to do a Christmas party or Christmas gifts or a bonus. That is part of your labor costs. That is part of the compensation you're giving to your team and needs to be accounted for in your labor. So we need to account for all those costs. Once we pull all of the production costs out, then we have what's called gross profit. And again, you don't get to keep all the gross profit because you still have to pay your overhead. So the gross profit then pays the overhead, and what's left is net profit. Now, the overhead is things like your office rent, your office utilities, your payroll or bookkeeping costs, I should say, and your marketing costs. Your overhead costs should not change because of the job change or the number of jobs change or the revenue changes. Those are fixed numbers. So your rent at the office, for example, isn't going to go up because you took on 2 more jobs. And it's going to stay the same if we did less jobs. But your production costs will fluctuate based on how many jobs you do. So what we're finding is, in this math, we hear a lot, from accountants, things like, you need to sell more and spend less. And that's really talking about, selling more in your revenue and spending less in your overhead. But that's not exactly true for our business. One of the big differences between a service business and a commodities business is that you have varying margins, and your production process will change your margins drastically as well. So just spending or selling more and spending less is not necessarily the right outcome. Really, it's about managing the process and building a more efficient process. So if we put numbers to this, for example, let's say that for every $1 million of revenue, Our production cost was $880,000, leaving us with $120,000 in gross profit. We took that $120,000 in gross profit, paid $100,000 in overhead. That would leave us with $20,000 in net profit. In this model, we have about a 10% overhead, which is actually pretty reasonable for a company in the $1 million to $3 million range. As the revenue goes up, the percentages do come down to 9 or even 8%, but 8 to 12% overhead is pretty reasonable for a construction business. So you're not going to get this down a whole lot more. And selling more revenue, if our cost is 88% of every dollar is going to production, then we're only going to have 12% left, no matter what that number is. So if we're at 12% gross profit and we're at 10% overhead, then we're never going to be more than about 2% net profit. So really the problem is here in our production costs. Our cost of production with inefficiencies, with not having a good process, is causing us cost more than we can afford. So for example, if we wanted a 12% net profit and we had a 10% overhead, we would need to have a 22% gross profit. And if we had a 22% gross profit, that means we couldn't spend more than 78% in production. So we would need to lower our production cost by 10%, usually through inefficiencies, sometimes through estimating, but that cost has to come in line. So one of the things that we do and that we will do for you as attendees of the webinar today is building out what we call a roadmap analysis, where we take your financials and we break them down a little bit differently so that we can see what's really happening in your business, right? So in this example, you can see on the top here, we have revenue of $2.539 million. Then we break out our labor costs. So we have in-house labor costs at $586,000. There's an owner contribution of $138,000 for the functional wage. So our total labor is $724,000. We then also have $24,000 in payroll taxes, almost $30,000 in workman's comp, and $26,000 in vehicle costs. So we have a tax and benefit load of $80,000 on this, making our total labor cost $805,000, or almost 32% of our total cost. We then have material costs at $654,000, or just almost 26%, a little bit of tools and equipment, some subcontractor costs at 29.5%, and then the other indirect related cost of $13,000 that need to be accounted for. So our job costs are 1.424 plus the 805, making our total job costs $2,229,000, or in this example, 87.8% of the total, leaving us with 12.2% gross margin, or $309,000. Our overhead is right at 10% at $257,000, but that only leaves us with $51,900 in net profit, or just over 2%. And this is not an uncommon place where we find builders. And really the issue is right here, right? We're spending too much in production. And I can tell you right away that when we have almost 30% in subcontractors and almost 32% in in-house labor, we have labor inefficiencies. We need to look at spending that much of our income in production and labor is pretty high. If we're at 30% in subcontractors with almost 26% in materials, that makes materials a little on the high side, right? So what's happening in materials? So we need to be looking at each one of these categories and be able to break them down and understand what's happening. Is that an estimating issue? Is it a waste issue? Is it labor waste, material waste? What's happening, and how do we fix it? But it's important to know where we're starting from. This workshop is all about projecting and budgeting. If we don't know what our numbers are now, if we don't know as a percentage what our costs for in-house labor, for subs, for materials, for indirect costs, for overhead, if we don't have those numbers as a percentage, then we can't project forward to know what's going to happen. But if we do, if we know that our materials, for example, are 25.78% of our total, we can look at what jobs we have on the books. We can look at when our progress payments are going to be, and we can anticipate what our material cost is every single month based on that percentage. So it's important to have these numbers. And like I said, because you're attending the workshop today, we will build this for you. I'll talk about it towards the end, but we'll build this for you and go over it with you so you know where you're at. So that's kind of the where you are now, right? What do the numbers look like? What's happening in the business now? The next thing is, where do you want to go? So taking and looking forward and saying, where do I want to be in my business? What does that look like? We need to set some target goals. And based on, I misspelled that, sorry, based on job mix and profit, right? So looking at things like, what do you want to make in a year? And I would encourage you to sit down and say, you know what, how much money do I want to take as a paycheck? What is my true overhead once I pulled out all my variable costs? And how much do I want to make in net profit as a dollar amount every year, or in the next year, let's say for 24. In this example, let's say that you want to make $250,000 a year. And so you want to take 85,000 as a salary. Once we pull out all the functional costs, you're at 120 for overhead. And we want to make an additional 175 because the 175 and 85 gets us to the 250 for our what we take and then pays our overhead. So you would need to therefore make $380,000 in gross profit to make that all work, right? And this is where I see a lot of businesses, business owners, I should say, not really understand the business. We're driving top line revenue, and that's really a commodity strategy. But when you do, like I mentioned, your margin can slip. And I think really a better strategy is to, instead of saying, let's do as much work as we can and hope that we make enough money, let's work from the bottom up. Let's say, I want to make this much gross profit. I want to make this much revenue, or this much I have this much overhead, and I want to make this much net profit. So what is my total gross profit target that I need? And then how can I do that in with the fewest jobs in the easiest, most sustainable way possible? So really what it comes down to is, how much revenue do you need to hit this $250,000 goal, right? And it depends on your margin. At a 10% gross margin, which the national average is about 12 with a 10% overhead, give or take. So at 10%, you'd have to do $3.8 million in revenue, and you'd keep $380,000 in gross profit. If we can improve our margin to 15%, then we would hit that same 380 at $2.5 million in revenue. At 25% margin, you could do that at $1.5 million in revenue. And at 35% margin, which we have clients hitting 35% margin, you can get that 380 at just over $1 million. So the question is, which way do you want to get there, right? Is there anything better about the $3.8 million revenue to get to 380, or is the 1.08 going to have a better quality of life, more free time to spend on things that really matter in life? So be thoughtful about how you put your business together, because this is part of your strategy. So kind of looking at that in two different models, right? You have model one, which has 51 jobs a year, and model two that has 18 jobs a year. Model one, we're doing a $75,000 average job and doing $3.8 million in revenue. Model two, we're doing an $85,000 job size average with $1.5 million in revenue. Now, quick note, we're not necessarily raising the prices 10,000 on every job that we're doing, but when we're dropping from 51 jobs to 18 jobs, we're not going to drop the bigger ones, we're going to drop the smaller ones. So our average job size is going to organically come up a little bit. So in model one, we're running at 10% average gross margin, and we're getting our 380. In model two, we're running at 25% margin, and we're getting 380. They both have the same overhead with our functional wage, and they both make the same profit. Why would you do model one when you can do model two? Now, model two does take more strategy. It does take more planning in our marketing and our sales process, understanding what our job mix is and knowing how that all needs to come together. But it is a very doable job mix or goal. And not to say that 3.8 million isn't a good number. I've got a lot of clients that are doing much more than that, but do it with the right model, right? If we're going to do 3.8 million, let's do it like this. Let's do it with 44 jobs instead of 51, at 85,000 instead of 75, and at 25% margin instead of 10. Then we would actually have gross profit of 950. That doesn't make our overhead go up. So we would actually make $745,000 in profit instead of 175. So let's do this and make real money. But it really comes down to planning and budgeting and building out the business model. So part of what we call our roadmap analysis is a projections page where we take a snapshot of where you are currently. So this is the numbers we were talking about from the example earlier, right? 2.539 million in revenue, 2.229 in cost of goods, or 87.8%, gross profit of 309, overhead of 257, net profit of 51. In this model, we did 76 jobs at $33,000 per job on average, some bigger, some smaller, but we're making 2%. The next thing we want to look at is What do we want? So in this, let's say that we want to raise our overhead a little bit. We want to have a little bit more help in the office with bookkeeping, make our life a little bit easier. And we want to make $350,000 in net profit after we've taken a paycheck. That means we need $650,000 in gross profit to make that happen. So we look at currently what we're doing. The current job mix in this business is some residential remodel at 80,000 and some smaller projects at 30,000. We're shooting for a margin of 25% in our estimating on the residential remodel jobs, and we're shooting for 30% on the smaller projects. But we're actually landing at 12.2% across the board, which means our efficiency is 48.8% on these projects and 40.68 on these projects. And just real quick, that efficiency is the actual margin divided by the target margin equals your efficiency. So if our revenue, if 70% of our revenue was coming from the larger projects and 30% was coming from the smaller projects, to hit our goal of 650, we would have to do 46.6 $80,000 projects and 53 smaller projects for a total of almost 100 jobs. We have to do 5.326 million at our 12.2% margin to hit our 650 goal. Kind of a lot. But if we made some improvements and changes, right? Let's say we moved up market slightly to 100,000 average job size instead of 80 with a 32% margin instead of 25. And we got our efficiency to 95 instead of 49. And we moved to 40,000 instead of 30 with a 38% margin and a 90% efficiency. This would be our actual margins with those efficiencies factored in. And we shifted our mix slightly. 75% of our work was coming from the larger projects, 25 from the smaller projects. We would then hit our goal with just over 15 of the remodels and about 13 of the smaller projects. So 28 and a half jobs a year at 2,073,000 in top line revenue with an average blended margin of 31.35%. And we would hit our 650 target with much less work. So we do basically a third of the jobs that we're doing now, a little bit less revenue, but keeping more through improving our efficiencies and have a better quality of life with our 650 in gross profit and 350 in net profit. And again, this is part of that roadmap analysis. So for each company, we will, once we build out your numbers and have your snapshot, then we can work with you to see what you're doing now. And if we were to make some changes, what would that look like, and help you build out the job mix that fits for you. And it's important to do this because as you're looking at your strategy, right, we need to know what our job mix is. There may be more than two, there could be, 4 or 5, but we need to build those out. Because the marketing strategy, the sales process, the estimating and production process on every different job mix is a little bit different and needs to be adjusted. The way that you market, for example, to a $100,000 job at 32% margin, that is a very specific client. Where are they? Where do they live? What's important to them? How do we build value and make sure that we're the builder of choice for them? Same thing with a $40,000 project at 38%, right? That's a very specific customer. Knowing who those customers are, knowing where they are, knowing how to market to them, how to get their attention, knowing what that sales process needs to look like to make it happen is pretty critical in your long-term success. So having these numbers and budgeting this out is an important part of the process of kind of building out your strategy, building out your business model, and knowing where you want to go. So from there, how do you get to your goal, right? We know where we are now, we know what our goal needs to be, and now how do we get there? And that's really where cash flow projections based on profit and actuals is really critical. So being able to track and know what's happening in your business, knowing what jobs you have in the pipeline, how far out you're booked, when do you need another job, what kind of job that is an important part of the process. So doing a cash flow projections, we have multiple different versions of this. We actually customize them for every client, but this one shows every month. It shows what jobs we have in green up here at the top, what jobs we have in design or PSA, professional services agreements, and we know what our costs are so we can project out every year, right? So we know what progress payments we're going to get, and every month we actually go through and put actuals next to the anticipated, or the projections, so that we can see if we're on track or not. But we can look here and we can see what our revenue will be every month going forward. We can see what our labor cost is going to be. We can see if we've oversold labor. Like, for example, right here, We've oversold our labor, so we know that we need to push something or use more subs or adjust something because we probably can't produce at 131%. So we need to make an adjustment to that. We can see how many hours we've had sold and how much we're over what we actually purchased or we have, right? So your in-house labor, one thing to think about, in-house labor is inventory. You're buying and selling labor hours no different than you would be buying and selling lumber. Whether you're paying them hourly or salary, it doesn't matter. You're buying those hours. Hourly, you're buying them one at a time. Salary, you're buying 40 at a time. And if you don't sell those, then they go in the trash. So we need to know where we're at and what we're selling. We can also track our, in-house labor. We know what our cost is based on what we're paying every month. We know what our sub cost is as a percentage, materials, the indirect costs, your overhead, and your total. And then you can see what our cash flow is going to be. So you can see right here, we're going to go cash negative right here. So being able to track that and know we need to start a job right here or we're going to have an issue. So in 6 months, we need to have another project on the books in this example. Now let's be looking forward to what types of projects based on our job mix. If we're doing additions and kitchens, we probably need to be focused on a kitchen for 6 months because getting an addition started in 6 months is probably unrealistic. So knowing what our job mixes are, we can pick which one is the right one to fit this slot that we have in 6 months in this example. So taking the numbers from your roadmap, from your trend, knowing what our labor cost is, knowing what our subs as a percentage are, knowing what our materials as a percentage are, knowing what our indirect costs are, what our overhead is as a dollar amount, and then our in-house labor as a percentage, and what is our hourly cost, allows us to build this out. So if we know that our subs cost us 24 and our materials are 20 and our in-house labor is 28, we can now build these projections, right? So we can start up here and we can build out every job that we have on the books. We can identify what our progress is going to be and when those progress payments are going to come and what our cash flow is going to be every month. We can then look at that cash flow and break it down like we just talked about through in-house labor, subs, materials, other overhead, and what you're going to keep. And then we'll know what our cash flow is going to be every month. We can see what our margin is. We can see what our projected actual net margin is. And we can build an actual process to allow us to get where we want to go and know when we need to fill in the gaps. But having this is really a critical part of being able to look forward and see what's happening. When do we need to take what jobs and what does our staffing model need to look like for these jobs in really running your business. Being able to track and manage cash flow and project out to know where we're going to be month to month instead of working hard and hoping for the best is a much better process. And again, we can help you build this out as well. So one other thing I want to talk about is some tactics to improve your gross profit, because there's two sides of this, right? Building out cash flow projections to know where we're going to be is critical to our long-term success, but also making sure we have enough profit to be able to hit our numbers and pay our bills and make that all happen is important. So if we are running at a 12% or around that range gross profit, like the national average is currently, we need to get that up a little bit. So I want to talk about some ways that you can improve your profit by plugging profit leaks. So some profit leaks that you want to watch out for are things like, are you doing a PSA? That's a professional services agreement, or sometimes called a design agreement, or, building out the process, getting paid for your time through the estimating process. You're a professional, just like an architect or a designer or in an engineering firm. Your knowledge is valuable and you should be paid for that time. It's a different sales process. It's a different education process to the client, but we find when educated properly, the right clients really appreciate this and are more than willing to pay you to make sure they get the job done properly. This is also a big problem we see in jobs where the jobs go over on cost and or on time, and there's change orders and cost escalation because we didn't plan the job before we started. If we planned the job out before we started and we had all materials selected, we knew what the availability was, we had our sub schedule, we had everything planned out. Yes, things could still change a little bit along the job, but we'll be much more likely to actually hit our goal and be on time and on budget, which will make it better, more profitable for the builder and less costly for the client. Another one that we see is pre-construction job organization time not being accounted for. There's a lot of stuff that goes into pre-construction job organization that really should be covered in the design or PSA agreement, but if not, it should be billed into the job. Job site mobilization and teardown, for example, all of the time you spend building out and getting budgets and material handling and selections and scheduling, all of those times need to be accounted for. We see a lot of estimating deficiencies, things like not building out our labor analysis and updating it at least quarterly. Your prices change, your costs change, you give bonuses, your tax and benefit load may change. For example, we're coming up to 24. Have you looked at what your 24 costs are going to be on your labor? Good chance your workman's comp is going to go up a little bit. What other costs could change? Are you going to give bonuses next year? If we're booked out 6 months and we're scheduling jobs for 6 months from now, what is the labor rate going to be in 6 months when we sell that job? Because that's the rate we should be using today to build that estimate so that we make sure we're successful and profitable. We see contract problems a lot, things like not having an escalation clause, not having an escalation clause that's enforceable. Really it should be tied to the consumer index, not just to your cost. So if the index goes up more than 2%, then you have to charge the difference. And it takes it away from my cost changed and having the conversation about what your margin is. But things like that need to be addressed. We see a lot of issues with change orders, either not managing them correctly or not billing them properly, or even just not educating the client that the change order, maybe it's $10,000 change order, and they're okay with the $10,000, but we didn't explain to them that that's going to add 4 weeks to the project completion, and they're planning on having family over for Thanksgiving or for Christmas, and now it's not going to be done in time. And because we didn't have clear expectations, the client's upset, and we end up giving some of that change order back for client satisfaction, and it costs us money. Or even if it doesn't cost us money, we have an unhappy client. So managing your change order process properly, making sure that you are reducing as many change orders as possible through the PSA process. And then when they do come along, educating your client on how it works, what it is, what the cost is going to be, how much that's going to add to the total, and what the timeline change is going to be on that project as well. We see a lot of issues with productivity, managing your productivity, really looking at your labor inventory. You're buying and selling these labor hours every week. If you buy 40 hours this week and you don't sell 40 hours this week, they don't roll over to next week, they go in the trash. So we've lost the option to make money on those hours, and we've paid for them, without selling them. So making sure that we understand in every aspect, right? Some of us have in-house design teams. Are we selling all of those hours? Are we selling all of our project management time? Are we selling all of our field labor? We need to make sure we're managing our productivity in all aspects. We see a big issue with looking at an individual job. You may do a job costing on one job and it might look good, but your margins for the year or for the quarter or for the month are not nearly as good. And what happens, we see, is that you don't account for all the hours. So we put in, 100 hours of project management time on this project. And so if it is 100 hours, then we were profitable, but it actually took us 170 hours of project management time, and we didn't account for that on that job. So that job didn't make as much as we thought it made. So be thoughtful about your productivity. Another one is indirect and related construction costs. There's a lot of other indirect costs that we need to account for. Vehicle costs, driving back and forth to the job site. If you are supplying your team with vehicles, those are production costs that need to be accounted for, either in the estimate directly, or usually it's better to put it in the labor burden because they are directly associated with labor. Small tools and equipment, they wear out. There's a cost to each job for that. Things like gas or uniforms or vacation time or holiday pay, any of those other costs need to be accounted for in your job. Material ordering, handling, and where they land, making sure that we don't have material waste, making sure that we're tracking and managing that, making sure that material is not delaying the project. This turns into an awful lot of runs to Home Depot, factoring in that, how much does that cost you? If one of your team is leaving once a day to go to the hardware store to buy something and the rest of the team is standing around waiting for them, how many hours is that costing you in productivity? If we could reduce that a little bit with a better process, we could be much more profitable and get the job done faster. And then punch list time. We know it's going to be there, doing pre-punch, working through the job so that it doesn't have a big list at the end. But even then, making sure that you're accounting for those hours in your estimate for the punch list time and building good value with your client on punch list is important. They need to understand how it works. We really should be talking about this before we even sign the contract. In our sales process, we should be talking about how our punch list process works. It builds value if positioned correctly, if you educate the client and set the right expectations. Here at Aspire, we like what we call a 3-step punch list process. And we explain this again in the sales process before we ever sign the contract. Our 3-step punch list process is at the end of the job. We'll walk through with you, and anything you notice we'll take care of. But it's important to us that you have a great experience. And so we're going to do 2 more. We'll be back 2 more times. We're going to come back 6 weeks after the job is done. So move in, get settled. Anything that you notice, write it on this list. You usually give them a punch list to write it on. You call them a week before that, go over their list, then you come out and you take care of everything on that list. And then you do a third one 11 months later, before the warranties expire on all the materials and products you put in their house. You're going to come back and just make sure everything's great. It usually involves like a 15-point checklist and maybe replacing a HVAC filter or smoke alarm batteries or something like that. But it's more value that you give them. And really the goal is to say, I care about you and your project even after we get paid. And building that value early on shows that you're different than any other builder. It builds more value, and it ensures that you'll get that final payment because they hold that final payment because they're afraid you're never going to come back, but you've already scheduled 2 more times to come back. So it's a much better way to build value and make sure we're getting what we need. One thing to think about on profit leaks is profit leaks leak gross profit. It's not revenue. It's stuff that's not factored for. So, our experience is that you can get between 2 and 8% just with with profit leaks and gross profit lift. 2 to 8% is substantial. So that's going from let's say you're at 12% average right now. That's 14 to 20% gross margin just with profit leaks, just, plugging some holes. To get there, by the way, if you went, from 12 to 22%, if you have a 2% net profit now, that would put you at a 4% net profit. That's the same as doubling your revenue, right? Back to that, the numbers that we were talking about. If you had $1 million in revenue with a 2% net profit and you were able to get that to 4%, getting that to 4%, getting 2% lift in gross profit leaks is the same outcome as doing $2 million in revenue in the current business model. It's a substantial difference. So focusing on your gross profit, focusing on your profit leaks, managing your process and really refining that is a critical part of your business and your success. And it'll allow you to buy back time, reduce your stress, and have more cash flow and profit for yourself and for your team. But you got to start with a strategic plan. You got to know where you're going and what you want to do, because it's critical to know where you're starting from, right? Where are we today? Where you want to go and what obstacles are in the way to get there. The world is changing. The market is changing. People are being more thoughtful about spending money. That doesn't mean that there's not money being spent. There's a ton of work out there, but you have to differentiate yourself and be the builder of choice for the right clients to get the right jobs to make that happen. But without a plan, without knowing what we're trying to accomplish, to know what our target goal is, to know what value we need to build with the client to make sure it's worth it to them, it's going to be very difficult. So any questions or anyone have any comments on that? So kind of want to wrap this up. Some next steps. Be thoughtful about your cash flow projections, knowing where your margins are, knowing where your business is at and what 24 looks like. What jobs do we have in the pipeline now? What jobs do we need to fill in and what gaps they need to go in to make sure that we stay cash positive and we keep everybody busy. So some things I'd like to offer. If you would like, we would be happy to do what we call a discovery call, where we can answer questions and discuss your business goals and help you build that out. We can also build this roadmap analysis. We would need a 12-month P&L and a couple of other questions. How much do you take from the owner? How many jobs you do? That kind of stuff. We have a list we can send out to you. And I can build that roadmap for you. We can show you what your numbers are now. We can build out the cash flow projections and the different types of modeling to see if we made some adjustments, what would that look like and how do we get there? So happy to offer that if you want to give us some financials. And then once we have that built, we can help you build out a cash flow projections like we just talked about, right? I'm happy to build that tool for you as well. And so that you can see where you are at every month and what you need to fill in where to make sure that you stay productive and cash positive. And if there's no more questions, that is the end of the webinar. I appreciate you guys sticking with us and making this, making time to make this happen. If you have any questions or there's anything we can do for you, please let me know. Like I said, we're happy to have a conversation, build out a roadmap, and build out some cash flow projections. Looks like Anthony has something to say.
There was a question in from one of the attendees about being able to watch this again. They said it kind of felt like drinking from a fire hose, which is very common for one of our webinars or from one of our workshops. And yes, all of you will get the recording, so you can rewatch it. But I also think it's beneficial to just take us up on the offer of building this out for you, so you don't have to watch this 5 times. So.
No, and I understand there is a lot to cover. There's a lot in the numbers, a lot of things that we don't focus on too often because we're so busy in the field. You're more than welcome. Like I said, we'll send you the recording. You can watch this as many times as you'd like. If there's anyone else in the company you'd like to have watch it. But really having a conversation, I'm happy to talk with each of you one-on-one, and answer your questions specifically. Building out the roadmap analysis and seeing your numbers and where you're at actually makes much more sense than looking at, example numbers. So building that out so that you can see where you're at, what you need to improve and change, and where to go next. I also have we call a roadmap book, roadmap tools, a bunch of tools that I'll send you. It has a labor analysis. It has what we call the Big 8 profit leaks. It has an example change order. It has an example PSA. A lot of different tools that we will go over with you and then send to you after we do the roadmap analysis. And if there's no other questions, thank you again. I hope you guys have a great Friday, and look forward to talking with you.